Sam Harris, thanks so much for being on Point of Inquiry.
Thank you, Josh. It's a pleasure.
So within the first few pages of this book, you ruffle a few feathers. You write, few scientists and philosophers have developed strong skills of introspection. And you say, our conventional sense of self is an illusion. I feel like you've spent the past decade pissing off religious people. Is this going to piss off atheists, and is that part of the intention?
Well, it's not the intention, but I think it will have that effect. I mean, there's certainly there's an inconvenient fact of demographics here. Really, is that what happens is people who have never had the kinds of experiences I discuss in this book, altered states of consciousness and intuitions of self-transcendence and any of the seemingly spooky phenomenon of subjective changes that religious people report, they will, just by dint of this kind of filtering fact of experience, they will tend to be atheists in more often than not, because this is just data they don't have about the nature of experience. And people who are religious will tend to interpret these experiences as evidence confirming the religious doctrines that got hammered into them as children, for the most part. So these kinds of experiences act as a kind of filter. So they confirm, their absence confirms for atheists that there's really nothing of interest there. Many people look inside and find nothing of interest to see through any technique of introspection. And so, and religious people have these experiences of whether it's unconditional love or a feeling of bliss while praying in church, or just some peak experience that the secular community has not done much to explain. And the only mode of talking about that seems to value it appropriately and set it into some conceptual context is one or another Iron Age religion or New Age faith. So these experiences are acting as a kind of filter. And yes, it's inconvenient for me that my core audience, the skeptical scientific audience, will tend to be people who haven't had their minds blown by these kinds of experiences. But obviously, there's a subset there that have, and so there are people who have taken drugs in their reckless use, and there are people who've had, they went to Burning Man, or they had some experience that pushed the edges of what they took to be their conventional sense of self, and revealed that it's something that is malleable, that it can be extended in ways, it can be perturbed in ways, and in fact, it can be extinguished, if only for moments at a time. And there is a genuine phenomenon that we can call self-transcendence, for lack of a better word, where this sense of being a self, the sense of being located in your head, behind your eyes, riding around in your body as though it were a kind of vehicle, that can be undone. And it's one of the more interesting and positive experiences people can have.
Does that have metaphysical implications if we're not a little pilot inside our head?
No, I don't draw metaphysical implications from it, and this is something I criticize in the book. What people then want to do when they have this experience is say, usually inspired by one religious doctrine or another, that this proves that we survive our deaths, that consciousness is not the result of anything the brain is doing, that we're really identical to the one mind that gave birth to the cosmos, etc. And so you have people like Deepak Chopra who obviously do this kind of thing all the time, and they bridge these, they connect these experiences to spooky physics and things we don't totally understand about the nature of the universe, and that's something that I think is intellectually illegitimate. There's nothing you can experience in the darkness of your closed eyes while meditating that says anything about the Big Bang or what preceded it. It has no relevance to cosmology. You're not intuiting that the experience of unconditional love does not prove to you that the energy of love pervades the cosmos. I mean, these are the kinds of moves that New Age people make and religious people make, and they are virtually always specious and unwarranted. What these experiences do tell you, and where they do connect to legitimate science, is they tell you that certain experiences are possible. They tell you something about human psychology and, of necessity, the human brain. And so the connection between spirituality and science is not at quantum mechanics and cosmology, where people like Deepak Chopra put it. It's at psychology and neuroscience and the related sciences of the mind.
When I talk to religious people, when I try to talk about big metaphysical issues with them, there seems to always be an impasse. There's like an experiential impasse that I guess you and I and the other people listening to this don't share with religious people, that they tend to fall back on personal experiences or emotional experiences that they've had from which they derive their worldview. And we can't kind of cross that chasm to actually be inside their heads and to have those experiences or understand what is driving them to believe the things that they believe, because they don't seem to have reasoned themselves into the positions that they hold. Is there a risk when talking about this stuff, and you acknowledge this in the book, that it's tricky to use words to describe to people a subjective, almost, transcendent, I'm not going to use the word spiritual, but you do, experience? Is there a problem there where if you haven't had it, then no amount of talking about it is going to convince you of it?
Well, there is a problem, but again, this comes back to your last question about whether I'm positing anything metaphysical. There are two different ways we can use experience to justify truth claims of the sort that spiritual people, quote, spiritual people tend to make. And the first is clearly illegitimate. The claim that the bliss the Christian is experiencing while praying proves that the doctrine of Christianity is somehow true. So, and this is obviously the interpretation that virtually every Christian would make of that kind of experience. They're praying to Jesus. They suddenly feel better than they ever have in their lives. They feel forgiven. They forgive themselves. The tears are flowing down their cheeks. And they use this as proof that some first century carpenter survived his death and is now existing in some ethereal place as an omniscient peeping Tom who cares about them and is in contact with them. Now, of course, a Hindu praying to Shiva is going to have a totally different story to tell, and yet the Hindus have these same experiences, as do Buddhists and Muslims and Jews and even atheists. So we know that the sheer incompatibility of the religious contexts and doctrines in which people have these experiences proves that none of those stories can be the real explanation, because they're completely incompatible with one another. There's just no way to reconcile the claims of Hinduism and Islam, for instance. So there's a deeper principle at work, and the principle is just that the human mind and human consciousness is susceptible to various changes, and that is indisputable. And that is just, all you have to do is drop acid to have that confirmed to you beyond any question for the rest of your life. Now, whether you have a good experience or a bad experience, that has a lot to do with who you are, and there's a fair bit of luck there. But there's just no question that human consciousness can be radically different than it tends to be in the case of any one person. And certain of these changes are clearly pathological, and we have names for the kinds of mental illness that result. But certain of these changes are normative, and which is to say desirable, and allow us to function better than we tend to. And so that part is indisputable. The claim that experience can change based on a variety of factors, but one of those factors is how we pay attention to our experience in the present moment, whether we're focused or distracted. And another claim that I make in the book, which comes to this issue of transcendence, self-transcendence, is that we know that the ego, the sense of being an unchanging self, an unchanging thinker of thoughts and experiencer of experience, is an elaborate construct and ultimately an illusion. And we know neurologically it doesn't make any sense. There's no place in the brain where your ego or your soul can be hiding. There's no one spot in the brain where all of the processing that creates our mental lives and our experience comes together. There's no Cartesian theater, as Dan Dennett once called it. So therefore, everything that you take yourself to be subjectively, all of your powers of cognition, your emotion, your autobiographical memory, your conscious experience in this moment, the fact that you can see the play of color and light in front of you visually, and that you can hear the sound of my voice, and that you feel you can perceive your body in space. All of these processes are disparate processes spread out over the whole of the brain, more or less, and all can be independently perturbed and interrupted, and they break apart in ways at the level of the brain that are highly counterintuitive. You can lose a capacity to recognize man-made objects, but be able to recognize animals. It's highly counterintuitive how things break apart when they are no longer magically unified as they are in the case of most of us most of the time. And so we know that the self, the sense that we all have of being an ego that is carried from one moment to the next, more or less the same. The things it's associated with change, but there's this this point behind the eyes that we are as locuses of consciousness. We know that it doesn't make much sense neurologically, and what I'm claiming, and this is an experience that is testified to for thousands of years in the contemplative world, and which any of our listeners can confirm for themselves. I'm claiming that if you look for this I, this feeling that you're calling I, this sense of being a thinker of your thoughts and a subject inside your head, if you look closely enough, and this is where the disciplined techniques of introspection like meditation come in, you will find that feeling is absent, that it actually disappears upon sufficient inquiry. And this is the experience of self-transcendence that is at the core of spirituality, that in the sense that I talk about it.
Going to those 2 points, I'm glad that you made the distinction earlier between the subjective experience, the ways that we can play around with how our consciousness sort of interfaces with the world, versus, on the other hand, any metaphysical claims about the nature of the cosmos that we might derive from that subjective experience. I just want to still harp on that, though, because I do think you're opening the door to something there, which is that you're walking this tricky line. When you talk about there's no way that we can, for example, arrive at conclusions about what happened in the Middle East thousands of years ago simply on the basis of having a spiritual experience in the here and now. I've spoken to pastors who became pastors because they dropped acid when they were in their teens and had a transcendent experience. There are millions of religious people around the world who would say, well, okay, maybe the Bible's a metaphor. Maybe I'm a Christian. In fact, my in-laws would say this. Okay, we're Christians because culturally we're Christians and we happen to grow up as Christians. I don't know what happened, but I do know that I tune into something, and when I tune into that, it proves to me that there is an all-loving, creative spirit that transcends what I can see and touch and hear and feel, and that's my defense for God. Does this make us more amenable towards those people? Because you've had a long, troubled history of being accused of alienating moderate religious people.
Yeah, well, this is really one of the most insidious and subtle consequences of moderate religion, moderate/liberal religion, which is that it suggests that when you take these kinds of these intrinsically positive experiences and religion at its most benign, where you just have people gathering in beautiful buildings to contemplate the mystery of existence and their ethical commitments to one another, it suggests that there is no truly rational way to do those things, that we must still pay lip service to revelation, i.e. the idea that an omniscient deity may have inspired one of our books. This is just false. I mean, it's not only intrinsically divisive, because obviously they're incompatible revelations, and we still have people aligning themselves with their co-religionists reflexively, even when their co-religionists are behaving like psychopaths. But it is simply false. That you can obviously build community and enjoy beautiful buildings and artwork and music and even have the full-blown self-transcending experiences of a genuine mystic without believing any bullshit, and certainly without lending credence to the claims of first-century people who knew absolutely nothing about science or anything else that should be framing our worldview at this moment in the 21st century. So this is one of the great holes in secularism, that we don't have a ready answer for someone who wakes up tomorrow morning with an extraordinary change in their conscious life, which they deem positive. If you wake up tomorrow morning feeling like St. Francis of Assisi, you wake up and you love humanity unconditionally, and you feel completely free of personal neurosis. This is an experience people have. Now, there are obviously pathological forms of this. You can have bipolar disorder and be in some kind of manic state, but there are normative forms of this kind of experience. They may be transitory or they may be permanent in some cases. I don't know, but there's certainly experiences people have that fit this description. The problem is, if you have this experience, there is no one to take you seriously and give it and have a serious conversation about its implications, ethically and psychologically, but the representatives of mainstream religion or some New Age cult, and that is a problem for secularism. If you go to somebody at an atheist conference and talk about this experience, they have no idea what to say. But just by dint of the kinds of ways in which people self-select in these groups, you're going to tend in the atheist community and the secular community to find people who are the least, who resonate the least with this kind of experience. Because if they were having experiences like this, they probably would have become religious, as you say. Religion is the only way we have talked about these experiences for thousands of years, and that's something that I'm trying to change with this book.
It strikes me that, and I'm only just thinking this aloud as you sort of say it, that what you're trying to do in a lot of your writing and a lot of your work is reclaim the conversation from the extremes, right? I mean, what you just said is reminiscent of what I've heard you say a bunch of times about the conversation around Islamophobia, and which you keep getting taken out of context when people, you've basically said, unless liberal progressives can have an honest conversation about the problems of extremism in Islam, then we're yielding the ground on that conversation to fascists and rednecks and pastors in the South who want to burn the Quran.
Right.
We need to carve out a space in the middle where we're able to have these conversations rather than yielding to them to the extremes. And is that kind of what you're trying to do here in terms of spirituality, for want of a better word? That, Westboro Baptist Church is as far from the kinds of spiritual experiences that you're talking about as the most militant atheist is. Is the object to sort of carve out a middle ground in which we're able to have these conversations and take back control over the conversation around spirituality from the extremes at both ends?
Yeah, I don't really think of it so much in terms of extremes. It's hard to place the middle in that spectrum, but yes, it's sort of analogous to what I attempted with the moral landscape, where I was addressing the fact that many people think that there is no basis to talk about ethics and the good life and find some intellectual foundation for resisting evil without believing something insupportable scientifically. So unless you're religious, you can't really think about good and evil clearly. And there are many people on the rational side, the moral relativists, who agree with that there is no such thing as evil once you get rid of religion and talk about the nature of human psychology at the level of the brain and evolution, etc. And so the moral landscape was my attempt to reclaim ethics and a concept of moral truth in the context of science and reason generally. And so I'm doing that for spiritual experience and the phenomenon of self-transcendence in this book. And I think, as you say, we have to recognize that people have these experiences or glimmers of these experiences in many different contexts, and sometimes they have them in contexts that are quite pathological, and they use these experiences therefore to ramify their belief in incredible ideas that are divisive and lead to immense harm in society. So yes, the jihadist who is a willing suicide bomber or is willingly putting his life on the line for Allah, very likely is having extraordinarily positive experiences in many cases. I mean, there's something ethically neutral about an experience like ecstasy. You can be incredibly happy and free of any kind of anxiety and any sort of interpersonal, obvious interpersonal neurosis, be having a truly peak experience, and that can be pointed toward just having a ton of fun at a rave, or it can be pointed toward Jesus on your fifth year as a monk in a Cistercian monastery, or you can be a jihadist just getting ready to strap on his suicide vest, and so the context in which we frame and understand these peak states of human consciousness is hugely important. It's all important. And I mean, ecstasy is a terrible moral failing and societal problem if it is fueling jihad. It's one of the best things that can ever happen to you if it's pointed in the direction of feeling more love than you've ever felt in your life for your wife or husband or your children, and so that, and again, it's one's beliefs about what ecstasy means are the difference in these cases, and that is something that the secular community has, given that we have no conversation about these experiences, we haven't been able to influence the conversation about them.
You talk about your first experience of sort of transcendent love early on in the book, and speaking of ecstasy, quite literally, it's an experience on MDMA. What role can and should drugs play in all this? I've recently been looking with interest at the rise of, I don't know if you know the drug ayahuasca, which is there are increasingly these not even parties but kind of cultural shamanistic experiences in Brooklyn and in Los Angeles and other parts of the country where people are taking this South American hallucinogen, which gives them a whole night long trip and apparently encourages you to reevaluate everything about your life, gives you incredible spiritual insights. Certainly dissolves the sense of self that you're talking about in the book. It also gives you the happy experience of vomiting your closest friends and family. Yeah, I did a segment on that on HuffPost Live, and I was asking them about that, and they were like, the vomiting really isn't a big deal. It's more about purging all of the bad stuff that's inside you. I had to point out that the bad stuff that's inside you is the ayahuasca, which is why you're vomiting it up. You weren't going to vomit up without the ayahuasca. But let's put that to the side. Obviously, it gives people some kind of extraordinarily transcendent experience. Is this something that you would encourage? I mean, not that drug specifically, but the experimentation, the use of pharmaceuticals to experiment with the nature of our consciousness?
Yeah, that's a hard one because it's, obviously I have to honestly acknowledge the role they played in my evolution here, the evolution of my thinking here, which the role in hindsight seems to have been indispensable, but one has to be mindful of the very real risks that people run when taking drugs of any kind, psychedelics of any kind, and so it's this is something I've tried to it's a kind of fine line to walk, and I've spelled it out on my blog in a article entitled "Drugs and the Meaning of Life," which actually became a section of the book. So I can't really do all of it justice here in a few minutes, but the short answer is, drugs are really the only method that absolutely guarantee an effect. If you teach someone to meditate, or you teach them to do yoga, or you tell them to go into solitude for a day or a week, you're not guaranteed that they are going to experience some profound change in their consciousness. I mean, they may just get incredibly bored. They may get lonely. They may, injure themselves doing yoga and come away feeling, well, there's just nothing to it. That's just, I don't know what people are talking about, but it doesn't work for me. Now, you don't get that kind of report after someone drops 100 micrograms of LSD or takes a sufficient dose of magic mushrooms, the relevant ingredient of which is psilocybin, or does ayahuasca or any of these other hallucinogens. And you don't tend to get that effect on MDMA, which is probably not best class as a hallucinogen, but an empathogen or an entactogen, which it works more just on changes in emotion. Though many millions of people have taken MDMA and not seen any great significance to it. They just have had fun at a rave or at a party, and so the context in which you take these drugs is relevant. But people have extraordinarily bad experiences on these drugs as well, and I have had those experiences, and it's why I haven't taken any drugs for a very, very long time. I mean, it's been now decades since I've taken any psychedelic. Not because I'm afraid that to get arrested and wind up on 60 Minutes talking about how I don't want to go to jail, but that is one feature of here. I mean, these drugs are illegal, and so there's a certain degree of paranoia and hassle that everyone incurs trying to experiment with pharmacology. But it's just the sheer fact that you can have a truly terrifying experience that, for all intents and purposes, renders you clinically insane for a time, especially on a drug like LSD, or I haven't taken ayahuasca, but I would imagine ayahuasca has similar liabilities. So yeah, I can't recommend them without significant caveats. But it is true that if you are as lumpen a character as I was in my 20s, who's just fundamentally skeptical that there was anything of interest here. If you taught me to meditate, I think I would have found nothing of interest in my own consciousness to see. There was nothing for me to see, and so I would have argued with you all day about how this has got to be bullshit, and these people are just emotionally unstable, and there's just all the claims of religion are clearly false, and so this is a wing of human endeavor that I can close the door on, and curiosity is not even appropriate. That attitude gets radically canceled and cut through by a drug experience in a way that I don't know any other surrogate for, and so that's just a fact, and but that's not where everyone is. There are a lot of people who take up a practice like meditation and have their lives and their outlooks totally transformed in an hour, and because they have had some talent for it. Their mind is naturally more concentrated than most people's is. I mean, I know I'm going on at great length here, but
sure.
The crucial variable here is from a contemplative or meditational point of view is the fact that we are all lost in thought. I mean, we're spending every waking moment distracted by our thinking minds. We're having a conversation with ourselves continuously, and it's such an automaticity that we don't recognize it. So most of us do not know an alternative to thinking every waking moment of our lives. And meditation is a technique to break the spell of thought, to actually pay attention to the present moment without being lost in one's conversation, inner monologue about the present moment. And it's the ability to do that. It's the ability to notice the difference between paying clear attention to anything, whether it's the breath or just what you happen to be seeing or hearing or smelling, to paying absolutely clear, non-conceptual, non-judgmental attention to some feature of your experience in the present moment. The ability to do that is what one is training in meditation, and an inability to do that is what keeps one from noticing that there's anything profound to notice about consciousness in the present moment. Most people who you teach them to meditate are just thinking with their legs crossed and their eyes closed, and they're not aware that they're thinking. Even though that you've told them you don't want to be lost in thought, and every time you're lost in thought, come back to the present moment, come back to your breath, come back to the sound of a mantra, whatever the technique is. They're thinking interminably and unable to break that spell, and that's something that psychedelics just kind of ram through. It's not that you don't wind up thinking on psychedelics, and your thoughts have huge consequences, but you have your discursive mind is overridden for a time in a way that accounts for the power of these experiences, but also accounts for how haphazard they can be, because you're not actually under your own control. You don't have a skill that you've built up over many, many hours of practice. What has happened is you've basically been flung over the landscape of mind in a way that can lead to some very pleasant experiences, but it can lead to some very unpleasant experiences.
Do you think there's a rise in awareness of this kind of attempt to be present in recent decades? I'm sort of slightly optimistic as I listen to you, because I don't want to damn you with faint praise, but it reminds me a little bit of watching Oprah interview Eckhart Tolle, or like reading
right.
about the Landmark Forum, or like EST, or these kinds of things that spring up where the philosophy is basically a kind of a secular Buddhist philosophy. If we spend all of our lives regretting the past and worrying about the future, and the secret to happiness is just to find a space, a clearing to be present in the now. Do you think that's on the rise, and is there anything that some guys like Deepak Chopra should be proud of in having alerted people to this possibility, even if it's in the midst of a lot of other mumbo jumbo?
Yeah, well, it's been on the rise for many decades. I mean, really, since the 1960s, it's been current in the culture. Unfortunately, it has been almost everywhere conflated with, if not religion itself, some version of mumbo jumbo that has been exported from religion. So, and the truly secular strands of it that you get now, with mindfulness being so current and in vogue, tend to water down the profundity so much that it just begins to look like the equivalent of an executive stress ball, where this is just a tool. Meditation now becomes a tool for self-improvement that you can use, like going to the gym, getting enough sleep, or doing anything else that is smart to do. And yet it doesn't promise any radical insight or radical transformation of how you view yourself in your life and in the world. I mean, all of this has been percolating for quite some time. It's just I'm not aware of anyone who has made the case that techniques like meditation hold immense promise, not just for personal insight and transformation, but they provide a necessary piece for understanding the mind scientifically. There are certain things we're going to discover directly in a first-person way in consciousness, or not discover at all. I mean, this is a fact about the nature of subjectivity. We can't conceptually reduce it to neurotransmitters in the way that many people seem to hope. There's always going to be a first-person side of this conversation, and the conversation about what it's like to be us subjectively, no matter how much we correlate these subjective changes with neuroimaging data or anything else we can find out about the brain. And there's just the fact that these experiences go much deeper and are much more rarefied potentially than the stress reduction emphasis suggests. So the fine line to walk here, which I try to walk in the book, is that some of the apparently crazier claims about there's no such thing as the ego, and you could recognize the fact that you're identical to the rest of the universe. Those crazy claims actually do more or less accurately describe certain experiences people have, and certain experiences that I would argue we should want to have, so that there's a lot of truth in what people like Deepak Chopra and Eckhart Tolle say, except the moment they start talking about how to understand this all in the context of science, it's just
it falls apart.
Deluge of bullshit, and that's the problem. So in the rare case that you get someone who has a sophisticated experience in meditation or with psychedelics, who can really do justice to the depth of these experiences and their significance, and who doesn't make the scientific errors because this person has a sophisticated understanding of science, what you rarely get in that case is someone who is aware of the problem of religion and who will make the appropriate skeptical noises about religious doctrine. So there are many people, there are many scientists who are quite enamored with meditation at this moment, who are studying it in the lab, who are meeting with the Dalai Lama to discuss these things. But these scientists tend to more or less just shill for American Buddhism at this moment. It's some kind of Western version of Buddhism that is scientifically informed and doesn't pay a lot of attention to all of the crazy claims that come out of Christianity and Islam, and doesn't want to get into the culture war at all. And so what I've argued in other books, not so much in this one, but it's implicit in everything I say in this book, is that being a Western Buddhist is part of the problem. I mean, you are complicit in the problem of this religious balkanization of our world if you're running around calling yourself a Buddhist. And it's just clear to me that we have to get out of the religion business. To get out of the religion business, we have to talk about these experiences just fundamentally outside the context of any sectarian claims.
One of the things that, this is a bit of an aside, but one of the things that you just reminded me of, which is underpinning this whole conversation, which underpins your book, which underpins a lot of religion, is the fact of consciousness, the fact of self-awareness. You write in the book, that we're built out of the same atoms as a ham sandwich, right? So the birth of consciousness has got to be the result of some kind of organization, just arranging atoms in ways that seem to bring about an experience of being those atoms. And you talk about Nagel's, what it's like to be a bat, his famous essay. In terms of eating meat, that ham sandwich obviously used to be sentient in some capacity, at least the ham bit of it did. Does this make you reflect, when you think about the fact of our own consciousness and our own sentience, about the ethics of using other sentient creatures for food?
Yeah, it's something that probably was even more relevant to my last book, The Moral Landscape. But I'm well aware that the industry that gives us most of the meat we eat is just a horror show in that it creates unnecessary suffering for billions of sentient creatures, which are almost certainly conscious and capable of suffering. So I just think our ethical responsibilities and our ethical concern should scale to the degree to which any given animal is conscious. So if you're driving home today and you see a insect splatter on your windshield, well, that's one sort of problem to have. If you run over a squirrel, that's another. If you run over a dog, that's another. If you happen to run over a chimpanzee, that's another. And if you run over somebody's child, that's another. This is a hierarchy of creatures and their possible conscious states and the kinds of lives that can be improved or harmed based on how we interact with them. And so where you put the cut for the emergence of consciousness, I don't know. I don't know if insects are conscious. Nobody does. And your intuitions could be plausibly tipped one way or the other, depending on how you want to think about it. But whether or not a cricket is conscious, I don't think it's especially rational to lose much sleep over the suffering of crickets, as some people are wont to do. And you have a whole religion, Jainism, which is fundamentally based on non-harming, and they don't want to, they won't even harm insects. And some people worry about harming bacteria. They don't want to take antibiotics because they don't want to impose so much death and suffering on harmless bacteria.
Sure, but no point in building a straw man. You know what I'm talking about.
No, but I mean, so I'm saying there's a continuum here. And so, but once you get up into farm animals, then I think there's a real conversation to have about what can suffer and how much. And I think there may be counterintuitive truths there to discover. I mean, it may just be a fact that pigs can suffer much more than cows can, and therefore we should be much more concerned about pigs. Now, I don't know, in fact, if that's true, but it's totally possible that we could discover that that's true. And where do fish rank in this taxonomy of suffering? I don't know. I would guess that they're far lower than the kinds of animals we farm on land. But to go directly to your question, I think it is an issue, and how an animal, the kind of life an animal has before we kill it is very relevant, and in fact, maybe the most relevant thing. So, if you're going to go out and hunt a wild boar that has lived its life in blissful ignorance of the prospect of being killed, and then you kill it and eat it, that strikes me as significantly different than having an industry where we raise hogs in the most painful, seemingly the most painful circumstance we can impose on them for their entirety of their lives. So, I think if you want to be a vegetarian and you want an ethical argument to support your choice, I think it's a very easy case to make. I mean, the conscience of a vegetarian, I think, should be much cleaner than the conscience of someone who is eating meat, because there's a whole area of the unnecessary suffering imposed on other conscious creatures that you can claim to be not complicit in. And I think I was a vegetarian for 6 years I became anemic, and it was not really working for me. And then I ceased to be a vegetarian. But I've gotten sufficient amount of pressure from readers on this subject that I'm thinking of experimenting with it again, because it was certainly, I was not the smartest vegetarian in the world in how I went about it. But yeah, I think it is an ethical issue, and someone like Peter Singer, I think, has a lot of wisdom in his discussion of how unconscionable it is that we treat animals the way that we do. But the crucial thing I want to just reiterate is that there is a hierarchy here. I think it is totally appropriate to be a speciesist, a so-called speciesist, in favoring the lives of humans over the lives of mice and rats and et cetera. I mean, it's not the kind of, I chose doing my neuroscience PhD not to experiment on animals because I didn't want to live that way. I didn't want to get up every morning and have to go saw the scalp off of a rat. But I think it's absolutely clear that there's certain kinds of medical research that is indispensable and ethical to do, and this entails the killing of animals and animals who cannot suffer as much as human beings, and whose suffering will lead to the massive mitigation of human suffering. And I think the ethical case for that is quite strong. And so people who drink the animal rights Kool-Aid and equate basically all conscious creatures with humanity in terms of ethical stature, I think that's a huge mistake.
Yeah. I mean, I think Singer, though, just in his defense, would agree with you there that there's less moral culpability in killing an oyster than there is in killing a chimpanzee. I don't think that's what he means by speciesism. He means having no particularly good reason for distinguishing between the sentience and consciousness of different species, and favoring one species simply because it happens to be Homo sapien. I think that's his understanding. But yeah, let's not get bogged down in that. Let's wrap it up here. But I'm interested in when you were, after 9/11, when you were sitting down to write The End of Faith, what did you think that it would have the cultural impact that it did? And if you could have projected forward and looked at where the atheist sort of movement, for want of a better word, is now, do you think it's in a better place or worse place than you might have hoped? Are we losing or winning this fight?
Well, on the first question, I had no expectation of anything. I don't know that I expected it to fail as a book, but I had no rational basis to expect that it would initiate this phenomenon in publishing that we've now come to call the new atheism, and that there would be any kind of cultural conversation that I would wind up near the center of. I just had no reason to think that. I mean, most books that are published simply don't get read, and what the author experiences is just an ocean of apathy. And then he or she moves on to the next project. But I think there's something like 300,000 or more books published in English every year now. I mean, so it's just the only rational expectation for a new author is silence the moment that book emerges from the printer's press. So the fact that it became as visible as it did, and then it was quickly followed by these other best-selling books. Obviously, people know Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and Dan Dennett very quickly published their own books on a similar topic, and then we were treated like a four-headed atheist for some years. I mean, I think that's the net result of that has been quite helpful. I think I don't know how to judge whether we're winning in any important sense. I think some of the poll results suggest that things the dial has moved a little bit in terms of the numbers of people who will claim to be spiritual but not religious, or to claim no affiliation with religion, or who will even check the box atheist when asked or when given that option. That those numbers have all moved, however, slightly in the right direction in the last decade. But on the other side, you also see the massive empowering of religious tribalism, globally speaking, especially in the case of Islam, And so it's what 10% of Americans are doing, and the kinds of noises they make when answering a telephone survey doesn't matter all that much, I don't think, in the scheme of clashing civilizations, where you have on one side, to speak of the Muslim world, you have surely hundreds of millions of people who have never for a moment questioned whether the Quran is the perfect word of the creator of the universe. It simply is the perfect word of the creator of the universe, and if you're going to say otherwise, we've got a problem with you. What percentage of the Muslim world answers to that conviction? I don't know, but it's far more than 10%, and it's really worth worrying about. And on our side, we have an incredible degree of Christian literalism and religious tribalism, which given the right stimulus, can just be, I think, activated to horrible effect at some point. Maybe just if you imagine what would happen to in the West if we had another September 11th style event, but larger, which is it would be a miracle if we don't have something as big as September 11th at some point in the next 20 years. We would have gotten very, very lucky if we don't have something like that. And if we don't have something that's larger by a factor of 10, I would consider ourselves very, very lucky. So what's going to happen in the West when something like that happens? Imagine the level of Christian demagoguery that would be possible. We had the spectacle of almost having Sarah Palin as vice president. I mean, not happily, that possibility diminished quickly, and then it became a punchline very shortly thereafter. But there was a moment there where no serious person could say this is impossible. Especially that moment after she addressed the Republican National Convention, that was incredibly sobering for me and everyone else who was worried about the possible influence of Christian demagoguery in our political process. And who knows what could happen given the right chain of events now or 10 years from now. So I'm not at all sanguine that we have won the war of ideas, and I really think we meaning secular, rational defenders of science and reason, we really do need to win it.
Sam, it's great to talk to you. I'm always exhausted when I talk to well-known people about having to always shill their latest book, because I always feel like I want to talk about the things that I find most interesting about them instead of their most recent thing. But this is one of those happy circumstances where it actually also happens to be, I think, one of your most interesting books. It's a great book, Waking Up. Everyone should go and grab it. Thanks for being on Point of Inquiry, and come back anytime.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Josh. It's a pleasure.
You got it.